Did you know that Major Dick Winters, the real-life leader of Easy Company, was so upset after reading the Band of Brothers script, he threatened to completely walk away from the project? And not just quietly bow out. He made it clear to the show's executive producer, Tom Hanks, that unless major changes were made, he'd not only pull his name from the project, he'd never speak to Hanks again. Think about that. The man who led some of the most dangerous missions of WWII, whose leadership helped define the legacy of the 101st Airborne, was more offended by a screenplay than a battlefield. Why? Because to Dick Winters, how a story is told matters just as much as what story is being told. Before Dick Winters ever wore a uniform, before he stood on the beaches of Normandy or led a company through Bastogne, he was a boy shaped by the quiet fields and deeply rooted faith of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. This wasn't just rural America. It was a world built on stillness, simplicity, and self-discipline. It was here that Mennonite farms stretched across the horizon, where Sunday was sacred, and where the loudest noise in some households might be the sound of a wooden chair scraping across a kitchen floor. In this environment, humility wasn't just a virtue, it was expected. Winters was born in 1918 into a family that held firm to Christian values. Though they were Lutheran by denomination, his mother's Mennonite background had a profound impact on his worldview. The Mennonites, like the neighboring Amish, emphasized pacifism, modesty, community, and a resistance to the vices of the modern world. Drinking, gambling, smoking, profanity, these weren't just frowned upon. They were viewed as signs of a person drifting away from moral clarity. These weren't abstract ideals to Winters. They were enforced through daily habits. Respect your elders. Keep your word. Speak plainly. Be strong, but never arrogant. And most of all, live with integrity, even when no one is watching. And as America inched closer to war, and young men around him were learning how to fight, Dick Winters was learning how to lead, without raising his voice. Even in later life, he credited his upbringing for giving him the inner discipline to lead men into situations where most would collapse. In his personal writings, Winters made it clear, his strength in combat didn't come from aggression or bravado, it came from self-control. "The men in my company knew I would never ask them to do something I wouldn't do myself," he wrote. "They trusted me. That trust was rooted in how I carried myself, not just in war, but before the war ever started. These values didn't make him soft. They made him unshakable." And it's this quiet force of character that helped define his leadership throughout the war, and later clashed so sharply with how Hollywood wanted to portray the chaos of combat. The first sign that something was off came in a line so small, so seemingly insignificant, that most viewers wouldn't have thought twice about it. It happens in episode 2 of Band of Brothers, during a moment of casual banter among the men. Sergeant Wild Bill Guarnere, known for his sharp tongue and sense of humor, throws out a line after Winters walks by. "He's probably a Quaker," Guarnere says. Then, with a smirk to the others, adds, "If he's from Lancaster County, he's probably a Mennonite." The room laughs. It's a quick beat, background color for character dynamics. But for Dick Winters, reading that line wasn't funny. It was a warning bell. First, there was the factual inaccuracy. Winters was not a Quaker. He had never been one, and he didn't appreciate being mislabeled, even in jest. But more importantly, the line framed his background, and by extension his identity, as something to be casually joked about. In Hollywood, it was just a throwaway line meant to inject a bit of personality. To Winters, it was a misrepresentation of the values that shaped his entire life. That upbringing, disciplined, quiet, morally firm, was not some oddity to be chuckled at. It was the foundation upon which he built his leadership. It was why his men trusted him, and it deserved to be treated with accuracy, not as the punchline of a barracks joke. It wasn't about being oversensitive. It was about honor. If the show could get that wrong, so early, so casually, what else would it twist in the name of entertainment? Winters didn't speak out publicly about this specific line, but according to interviews and his personal correspondence, moments like this began to erode his confidence in the script. They weren't outright betrayals, but they were cracks in the armor, small signals that the tone of the project might not match the solemnity of the real story. And for a man like Winters, who lived by a code of precision, restraint, and respect, cracks were not acceptable. As Winters kept reading the script, his concern deepened. One thing stuck out like a bullet hole on a clean uniform: the language. F-bombs, crude phrases, vulgarity everywhere. To him, it didn't just feel out of place, it felt like a betrayal. In a 2003 interview, Winters said, "As far as I could see, the only part they were contributing was the F word, and they kept using it more and more and more. It was unforgivable." He understood that men in war cursed. He'd heard it. He admitted his fellow soldiers used profanity. But not like this. Not as the centerpiece of their dialogue. He believed it distracted from the real story. The courage, the leadership, the sacrifices. He feared that audiences, especially younger ones, would walk away remembering the language more than the lessons. So he took action. Winters first approached the head writer Eric Gendrason. He told him plainly, this is going into homes, into schools, into living rooms. It was going to be shown in classrooms. Parents would watch it with their kids, and the script, as written, made the story unwatchable for many of those audiences. But that didn't move the needle. So Winters went higher. He wrote a personal letter to Tom Hanks, the executive producer, the man helping bring Easy Company's story to the world. In it, he expressed how deeply disturbed he was by the script's profanity. He made it clear, this wasn't just a note from a retired officer. It was a matter of integrity. He wanted the story told right, and in his eyes, right meant telling it with dignity and discipline. Tom Hanks responded, not with a form letter or a studio reply, but with a phone call. The two men talked for nearly 30 minutes. Hanks tried to defend the creative choices. He argued that the profanity was realistic, that it captured how soldiers really spoke. But Winters didn't back down. He told Hanks something that stopped him cold. "I can shun you." He wasn't being petty. He was explaining how things were handled where he came from. In Mennonite country, if someone disrespected your values, you didn't fight, you didn't sue, you didn't scream, you just stopped speaking to them. You shut the door, and that was it. He made it clear that if changes weren't made, he would cut ties with the production, and with Hanks himself. Then he followed up with a second, even more strongly worded letter. And it worked. 1 week later, Hanks called again. "We're going to make the changes you asked for." The script was edited, the profanity scaled back, the most explicit language, particularly the F word, was reduced, and Dick Winters got one huge personal victory. His character, portrayed by Damian Lewis, would not say a single strong curse word in the entire series. None. Even in the most harrowing scenes, Bastogne, the concentration camp, the chaos of combat, Winters kept his composure. The harshest line? When he told Lewis Nixon, "Find spears, and figure out how the hell to get them some food. One use of hell, that's it. That restraint? That was intentional." It was Winters' fingerprint on the project. But the battle wasn't over. There was one final scene that Winters tried and failed to have removed. In Episode 9, Private John Janovic, portrayed by a young Tom Hardy, is shown in bed with a German woman. The scene is brief, but explicit. It features nudity. It was based on a real encounter, but that didn't matter to Winters. He felt it had no place in a story about honor, brotherhood, and sacrifice. He told Hanks, "You have a wonderful episode here. But why, for the sake of 10 or 15 seconds, did you run that sex scene? It was out of place completely." Hanks replied, "You have to remember, it was a true story." Winters didn't hesitate. No matter. It was an episode that could be shown in any school, any place, any time, or any living room while your children are watching. Then you see that, and bam. For any normal person, you've just ruined it. He raised the issue again with the writing team. But this time, no one budged. The scene stayed in the final cut. Despite that loss, Winters stayed involved with the project. Why? Because he believed in the bigger picture. In his own words, "I objected to the amount of profanity in the series and the one gratuitous sex scene, but overall I was very pleased with the finished product." He was especially glad that his men, the men of Easy Company, were finally getting the recognition they deserved. The world was watching. And for Winters, that mattered more than anything. In the end, he left his mark. Not just in history, but in the very way his story was told. So next time you watch Band of Brothers, pay close attention to Damian Lewis's portrayal of Winters. The calm tone, the controlled language, the moral clarity. That wasn't just good acting, that was Dick Winters. editing his legacy in real time. And if this gave you a new appreciation for the man behind Easy Company, give the video a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear the story behind the story. Thanks for watching.